information from about them? Well, fortunately, there was a lot going on in Ireland too. There was a lot of recording going on. Most notably the Annals of the Four Masters. But the Annals of the Four Masters, by the way, are skewed towards the O'Donnells because they were Donegal people. So Micheál O'Clery was, so there's big long pieces about the O'Donnells and maybe not so much about the O'Neills. So everybody has their little prejudices. But nevertheless, there's a tremendous amount of information available. And you see the difference right away between the two. So, but I'll talk about Hugh a little bit more now, because Shane unfortunately dies very early, even though in his short reign he made a huge difference, because what he did was he showed the Irish that they had a tremendously powerful past. He never ever bent for 1 second, and he went to he followed his father's footsteps to the court of Elizabeth, if for no other reason than to show that he could come back without ever having repeated what his father did, and not only not repeating what his father did, but renounced the earldom of Tyrone, and explained to the king, to the queen and her court, that it was an empty claim they had, because he explained to them that in Irish law Con had acted ultra vires. He did not have the right to say any of those things or do any of those things. And Con himself would probably be the first one to admit it, and in some way maybe justified himself that it was an empty, that he signed all these things, but it had no effect on Irish law. So therefore he was able to explain to them, and especially to Cecil, who was a very legal mind. Cecil was a cunning, canny lawyer. He was essentially a lawyer, and he had to admit that according to Brehon law, they had achieved nothing. Now, what's interesting is that Elizabeth actually confirmed him as the O'Neill. So in other words, he did the very opposite to what his father had done. Now that again, he's not given credit for that. To me, that's probably the most significant thing that was done throughout that whole period. To come back. Now admittedly, she was only on the throne 4 years. That was in 1562, and she'd got on there in 1558. And she was relatively a slip of a girl, totally infatuated by him, and told him that she'd marry him in a heartbeat, and would have, but she said they'll never let me. They would never let me do it. So they got on extremely well together, and they spoke, of course, in Latin. He spoke English very well, but he said that it made his tongue feel bad. It did not. It didn't work well for him. He obviously had a great sense of humor too, because a lot of the stuff that he said, you can see it may read deadpan, but you can see that he was having fun with him. Okay, coming up in a minute. I'll take questions, by the way, afterwards. So unfortunately, he had consolidated his power in all of Ulster, and he had achieved what he set out to do, which was to be the king, the ruler, the chieftain of all of Ulster, to re-establish his ancient domain, which had come down from Con of the 100 Battles and probably long before that. And he had done that by subduing the O'Donnells in Donegal, and he had subdued the MacDonalds in Antrim and had driven them out at a great battle, which I forget the name of. I'm sure Pat will know it right off the bat. I have it highlighted here somewhere. Not that it would mean not that it means a darn thing, but anyway, it's that's that great battle. Where it was like a massacre. They killed several thousand of the Scots, sent them back to the Mull of Kintyre and back into Scotland. And then he went to. He actually had sent messages to the MacDonalds in Scotland to come over and help him, and he went to them when they had landed at on the north coast. I'm trying to remember the name of the Cushendon, and he was so happy because he had persuaded them, he thought, to ally with him against the English. So he went to meet them. Now this was Alexander, his old enemy, with only just a handful of men, and they met, and they were having a great old time, and they killed him. Their excuse was that a fight broke out. Well, it turned out that it had been well planned. It took years afterwards, but it turned out that it was a very carefully laid plan by the English, who had paid off the MacDonalds more. It was just a very sad thing. It was like, what happened to the MacDonalds themselves when the Campbells killed them, murdered the house of MacDonald. Again, in Scotland, under the tutelage and of the English. The English always did that stuff. Well, they buried buried Shane there in the spot, and then a few days later they dug him back up again, and they cut off his head and sent it down to Dublin, and it was on a spike at Dublin Castle for a considerable amount of time afterwards. But he's buried there, and you know exactly where he's buried, right? But his head probably was eaten by the birds so it was a sad end to Shane. Now, in the meantime, that's only 1567. So there's still a lot of time left before 1603 so we're not even going into that at the Battle of Kinsale, and 1607 the Flight of the Earls. But in the meantime, you had the Second Desmond Rebellion in Munster, which is a huge thing. Okay, coming up. But I just want to mention this, and then we can come back and talk about it. Linnoch became the O'Neill. What's the name? Turlough Linnoch became the O'Neill. Hugh was brought back from England, 27-year-old, very English, and he actually served in the English army against the Desmonds. So that's often mentioned in history, but the circumstances of it is not that terribly well explained. It's kind of like a northern chieftain somehow went down and allied himself. He wasn't even a northern chieftain. He was part of the English system. So he actually served with Perrot, who was undoubtedly Henry VIII's illegitimate son. He looked exactly like Henry VIII. He was a very brutal, but a very popular soldier in Munster. And now there's no evidence to support any belief that Hugh was actually present at Smerwick or was part of the bad things. And I'm not sure that wouldn't have worked probably time-wise anyway. But so Hugh later, of course, it took him a long time because Turlough Linnoch, the guy who was tarnished to Shane, didn't die until 1593 or 95, I'm not sure which, but like in the 90s. But in the meantime, Hugh, so many things had happened, the 9-Year War and the Desmond Rebellion and some things, and Hugh had come over and he had he was kind of being accepted into the Gaelic world, and he had actually become Tánaiste. So he was the legitimate O'Neill because he was elected Tánaiste. So whether he was illegitimate by birth or whether he was Con's son or illegitimate son or whatever, the fact is Con acknowledged him legitimately, and the the electorate of Ulster elect him Taoiseach. So when Thurlock died, he became O'Neill.